Hey reader, welcome back to the channel. This is Centaur here, and today we're taking a look at our first tactical video and walking through ways to be able to take tactics that are present in this case on the RTS game and how to translate them into the tabletop miniatures game for StarCraft. Okay, and so of course it's fitting, I think, since anybody who owns the starter set, founder's box, or starter army is probably going to own a Terran force, for us to start with the Terrans. Okay, and the most iconic tactical usage of Terrans involves Terran bio, which is what we have primarily a lot of right now. And that is, of course, the stutter-stepping tactics. Now, we'll be talking a little bit about this in case you're one of those people who's coming over to the StarCraft TMG from, say, like a game like Warhammer 40K, or whether you're coming over from Middle-earth or Bolt Action, lots of different places. We're going to kind of walk through what exactly this is and then how to be able to utilize it on the tabletop. Just know that your options and varieties are going to change based on what tactical cards you take, what faction you're choosing to play for the Terrans, etc. It's going to adjust ebb and flow. So some options might be available for you, some are not. So take that into consideration when it comes to building out your list. So to start off with, what is stutter stepping a unit? Well, it's kind of this weird thing about the RTS game because of the fact that it's every computer game at a point is a trigger system, right? That triggers a specific event. So when a specific thing happens, it typically shows with a form of animation and then something occurs. In the case of Terran Marines, it's the fact that when you tell your Marines to fire and you start seeing them light up, technically all the damage that they're done already for the entirety of that attack has already happened, right? Or at the very least, it's going to be applied even if the unit is then told to do something else, like, say, running away. And so you'll see a picture over here on the right-hand side of a guy who was doing this online where he was kind of showing the basics of how to stutter step, where as soon as the initial thing is done, you immediately tell them to run, and then they can start moving, but their damage is still being dealt, right? Even though the animation has stopped because of how the trigger works. And so what we're effectively trying to do with stutter stepping is we're using ranged units. It's always ranged units. We're trying to move slightly, just a little bit at a time, just in time for, the effect to recharge so you can use it again and shoot again, to kind of buy time for them to shoot down units who would otherwise be engaging them in either close combat or maybe trying to shoot at them at range, right? So you can technically stutter step away from ranged units as well. We'll talk about that more a little bit later. But of course, most commonly it's to avoid things like Protoss Zealots, like you see in the picture down at the right, Zerglings, Ultralisks, things like that. Although admittedly, how much shooting do you have to do in order to get rid of an Ultralisk? There's a lot of it. So your progress may vary, and your success may vary based on what kind of unit you're shooting at. But the goal, of course, is quite simple. You're trying to improve your damage potential while minimizing the amount of damage being done back to you. And especially because of how wounds are done in the TMG game, uh, how many models you can physically keep yourself from losing, right? Because it's not like we can allocate a bunch of different wounds onto everybody and then start losing models. We're going to start losing them as soon as we get 2 wounds through. So, of course, the issue in the tabletop miniatures game is that disengaging from the enemy is a little bit harder, right? We don't have this whole, you don't necessarily have to do a complete wraparound in order to make an enemy unit completely ineffective or unable to escape you, right? And the reasoning behind this is the way the disengaging rules work is that if you don't have more supply than the unit that's attacking you, if you do choose to disengage and move away, which happens with no penalties, you can technically do it with no penalties. That's perfectly fine. But what happens is you wouldn't be able to then charge or shoot in the following turn. So while you have technically tried to get away and maybe even they fail to charge you again on the second go, on that following turn, you aren't shooting back at them, which means that doesn't technically count as stutter stepping. So in order for us to stutter step, we need to make it so we can hit people while they're coming in, potentially break away before they even hit us. And if they do end up hitting us, like that poor little Marine that you see over there who's down into the red zone for hit points, to be able to back up and re-engage with shooting so that way we can remove them before they can start removing too many of our own models. And so, of course, the solution to this, the tabletop miniatures game of helping to avoid the disengaging penalty and be able to be more effective with how we're using our Marines, is stutter stepping, right? It's just that we have to translate it down. So we need to be able to kite the enemy while still maintaining shots. It's very important for understanding what stutter stepping technically is. And second, we need to be able to effectively disengage while still being able to shoot if we aren't able to prevent the charge from happening in the first place. So when looking first at faction choices, in my opinion, the best way to protect yourself from a stutter stepping perspective and set yourself up for success is to use the Terran Armed Forces. This is your generic Terran style force, kind of the go-to unless you want to use a specific variant, version, or group of people. And that's kind of nice because it's actually really good, right? First of all, you can effectively disengage reliably because for one unit every turn, if you're willing to tap this card for one of its abilities instead of for its CP, you can just say that per tactical retreat, the active unit ignores the disengage penalty for the remainder of the round. Now, ain't that nice, right? So now we have the ability to just say, even if somebody has 4 supply, they've got 2 zealot squads into our, call it, 2 marines. I don't know how many they'd actually have in there, but just suffice it to say, let's say they were able to get them into our 2 marines. We have a supply of 0, they have a supply of 4. We can still disengage and we can technically still shoot. How much shooting you're going to be able to do is a whole different question, but you can effectively you can at least effectively retreat while still shooting. So technically, still stutter stepping, which is really nice. The second thing is that it does give you a guaranteed first move for 1 turn of the game. Okay, just for once per game, you can say, beginning of the movement phase, I am the person in the lead. I get to go first. Even though you may be winning on victory points unless the opponent would get to go first, in the event that you're tied, instead of doing a roll off, you just get to say, we are activating first. And that is really, really good for maneuvering to positions, getting people out of where they need to be, and making sure that you can be more effective at escaping the clutches of enemy soldiers, which is nice. The other thing, too, is that it gives you access to core and support slots. It even gives you an elite slot for the purpose of marauders, which is nice, which means that if you need to be able to keep your marines alive or your marauders, who also need to do stutter stepping in some cases because they're fine in close combat, but they're not particularly good, being able to keep them alive because those are the kinds of units that you need to be able to field, but also the support slots are one of the ways you can actually keep them from getting wounds on them. This is a really nice balance, right? There's nothing wrong with Rainer's Raiders right now with getting access to a hero slot. But it is really nice that at least the slots they have are going to be effective for building out a stutter stepping focused force, which is good. With Rainer's Raiders, like, it can technically still work. Rainer's Raiders is really good for board movement and for prevention of ranged damage, which is really nice, okay, for range stutter stepping, because we'll talk a little bit about preventing range unit damage with stutter stepping here, but there's obviously a whole lot more to be said about just preventing enemy range damage. We'll talk about that more in a future video. But just suffice it to say for now, when it comes to stutter stepping, Rainer's Raiders is a cool group, and they give you access to really nice stuff, and Rainer himself is a really good tool for using and for the stutter step micro. But I personally think if you really want to go heavy into stutter stepping, the TAF is the better way to go, just because, again, you can guarantee that for one of your units every turn, you can disengage while still getting to shoot in a given turn, which is really nice. From a tactical card perspective, you can technically run any tactical cards you want, but there are 3 that come to mind as being particularly useful. The first is the barracks, just the lowly barracks. It gives you access to go, 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 which means that you can get a little bit of extra movement. So if you need to maneuver a little further away from people, especially if you're disengaging from them, it is nice to be able to say, I'm getting an extra 2-inch move followed by a 3-inch regroup, so potentially an extra 5 inches worth of movement effectively. That is really, really nice for maneuvering a bunch of your guys away. You then also have the engineering bay. It's also worth noting, by the way, if you don't need to maneuver away because maybe you're able to stunt the enemy, able to stop them, you think you're going to work out really well. That is a barracks that you could easily tap just to trigger stim pack, which is also really nice. So you've got some options there. The engineering bay is also a really good choice if for no other reason than if they do catch you and you don't have medics near you, it is nice to be able to just tap the card for tough one, so at least you're preventing some damage from going into your unit. Even if it's not like a lot of damage, at least you're removing some of it, which is always nice. Marines don't have a lot of wounds, so that's not great. And even Marauders don't want too many wounds on them. That's kind of the nice thing about Marauders. They want to have a little bit of cushion. You also can add critical 1 onto your infantry weapon, so at least you'll be more reliable at putting wounds through against the enemy. And if you are shooting, the ideal scenario is you're just going to winnow the enemy down to a point where even if they do get into it, isn't going to matter all that much. And then finally, we've got the Academy. The Academy obviously isn't going to help your Marines or Marauders to be more effective at shooting. What it is going to do is it's going to open up a lot of support slots so that way you can run a lot of medics, and it's going to give the ability for your medics to spend their heals and potentially their optical flares, more on that a little bit later, in order a little more efficiently from a CP perspective, which means you can do more of it every single game, which means you can heal more guys and keep your guys on the table, which we low-key kind of need in order to win the stutter step game. And so to start off with, in terms of useful unit synergies, there's a couple of things we're going to be balancing. The first is the Marauder concussive shells. The best situation for you is that Marine Squad number 1 is shooting at a unit, that wants to charge into it is able to remove a model or even a few models. And then after having done that, the enemy tries to charge and the marauders fire off their shells. They slow down the charge. The charge has already been committed, but now they're out of range. They come forward, but they don't actually get to connect and finish the charge, which means you get another turn to potentially shoot at them, right? And another turn to be able to move away without having to use disengaging, which is really nice. The second ability is the Medic Flare. This is going to be more useful against ranged work for stutter stepping away from ranged opponents, but being able to reduce an opponent's range by 4 inches and not allow them to use long range, which is typically an extra 4 to 6 inches if they have that special rule, that's going to mean a lot less shooting against your unit, which is going to mean less wounds against your unit, which is going to mean more effectiveness from your unit, which is really nice. The third is the medic heal. This is obviously going to be useful for preserving things like impact hits and ultimately wounds in close combat as needed, but most notably the impact hit, because the impact hit, when it first comes through and starts tearing through into things, one, there's no way for Terran units to get an evade save against that, at least not until we get some hidden units. Hint, hint for the ghost. But until that time, there's not much you can do about it, right? You're just getting whomped and you're going to take wounds. And if you stim pack, that's going to also mean non-lethal wounds coming out, right? So we want to make sure we're removing some of the threat, some of the danger with those. You then have the Marine Marauder Stim Pack. So Stim Pack is going to be nice because it adds an extra 2 inches to all of your moves. So even a go, go, go that you use on the unit would not be a 2-inch move. You would get I think, an extra 2 inches. May not be now I think about it. Because it's buff speed too. That one's a specific 2-inch move. So never mind what I just said there. But it does mean that your normal move, instead of moving 4 inches with a 3-inch regroup, would be 6 inches with a 3-inch regroup, which is really nice for making sure you can maybe get away from things you want to get away from, or maneuver up to a position where you're just barely in range of a unit, but still making it a difficult charge for them so you can get in a shot on a given turn instead of just running. You also have things like the Goliath Underbelly Machine Gun. Technically, Jim's Revolver Justice also does this, where they have the pinpoint special rule. And the pinpoint special rule is nice because it means that you can fire into combat, right? And so while normally speaking, a unit that's locked in combat is going to be, slightly, it's going to be kind of in a one-on-one duel effectively against them, even when it comes to shooting. The Underbelly Machine Gun and Jim's Justice Revolver does allow the opponent to, yes, roll an evade save, but it does mean you do get to shoot into the combat. And so you can help to kind of winnow things down. And so between the Stim Pack adding things like Precision 3, and then potentially the Underbelly Machine Gun helping to remove some of the wounds off of the unit, possibly even some of the models themselves, all of that's just going to be a plus positive for helping you be more effective in the close combat round. Because at the very least, there are less wings coming at you, which can only mean good things for Marines or Marauders for that matter. And then finally, larger squads are generally going to be good, both because they're going to have higher supply, which is really nice. It also means, of course, your volume is generally going to be higher and your wound count is going to be higher, right? So generally speaking, you're going to find that they're more effective than the smaller ones. They take up more points, but they might live longer. At the very least, they're better at doing stutter step micro than the smaller squads, because the smaller squads are just more likely to get chewed up a bit, and then suddenly it doesn't matter how well you micro them, they don't have the volume of shots needed to actually get reasonable damage down on the enemy. So when looking at stutter step situation number 1, this is where we have our Marine squad, but we are near a Marauder squad, okay? The first thing you're going to do, step 1, is you're going to maneuver to shoot the enemy with your Marines. So you want to aim for being roughly 11 inches away. If you can wait for the enemy to activate a unit and then you can react to how far they are right now, that is the best scenario. Obviously, you can't always do that. Can't always plan on that. But in general, in as much as you can, that's ideal. Don't forget to pop Stim Pack. This can make it really useful for you to be able to get a little bit of extra mobility and maneuver. It also means you may not need to tap go, 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 which is nice because it saves you CP for later. But the most important thing is that you want to make sure that your Marines are ending within 4 inches of a Marauder squad. And the reason for this is that the concussive shells rule does not have a range from the Marauder to the charging unit. The range is measured to the unit being charged, which means we know exactly how this is going to go. We know exactly where to position. We just need to have one Marine within 4 inches of one Marauder. It is not wholly within from a unit perspective. It is within. So only one guy needs to clip that 4-inch radius. And what that means is now the two of these guys can work together. Then what's going to happen is, ideally in step 2, you shoot first at the charging unit, right? You get your shots in without them getting evade saves. You get shots in before anything crazy happens, before we're rolling dice. We want to make sure that things are as effective as possible. So we're going to winnow down the enemy as best we can. Step 3, When the enemy declares their charge, the marauders are going to spend 1 CP. They're going to tap their concussive shells, which you should probably always take. I'm going to be completely honest, right? Just leave yourself a CP to make sure that that's always available, okay? And then what's going to happen is you're going to be reducing 3 inches worth of distance on the final charge distance. And ideally, that causes them to fail. Now, if it looks like they only need a 1 plus, right? They're super close in order to get a successful charge, maybe don't tap the shells, okay? But in as much as there's a chance where you're pushing it so they need a 5 on the final roll, or 6 is even better on the final roll, or maybe they can't even technically make the charge at all, those are the ideal situations for using concussive shells, right? We want to make it so it's a really high difficulty so that they fail, they stop short. And then step 4 on the next round, in the next movement phase, we're just going to move them back, right? And if we need to, we're going to use go, go, go if needed in order to get a little bit of extra movement. You can stim pack again if you really want to. But the final goal is, again, we want to make it so that we're pretty far back away from where the enemy is, okay? If needed, yeah, throw in some extra range. And if you can, try to move the marauders back so that they're back as well. It might mean that the enemy goes after the marauders. Fair enough. Marauders can take a little bit of a beating from an already weakened unit. And then you're literally just going to repeat those steps. Right again, right? You got to make sure that you're within the right distance from the enemy. You're going to make sure you try to shoot first as best as possible, slow them down with the marauders as needed, and then regroup away as necessary later. Okay. Now let's say you don't have marauders nearby. Well, if you don't have marauders nearby, you want to have medics nearby. So we're still going to maneuver into position, aiming for that 11 inches away from the enemy. Probably going to use stim pack so we can get that precision 3, but also it allows us a little more freedom as regards that maneuver. But we want to end within 4 inches now of a medic squad, and ideally within range of 3 medics within 4 inches. But depending on the setup, you might only have access to be within range of 1 or 2. Okay? But ideally, you want to catch all 3. Step 2, shoot first. Always a good idea, right? It's always going to make it a little more effective. Step 3, when you're charged, you want to use your medics to heal the incoming charge. Okay? Now, there are some situations where you may say, well, I don't know that I necessarily want to use my medic heal here, because let's say, for example, you're being charged by 3 Zerglings or a lone zealot, maybe because you shot already, and you're like, if this medic unit uses their heal on this unit over here, they might prevent all the damage. That is true. At the same time, it might mean that another unit that's also nearby is going to get charged, and the medic cannot then turn around and use that same reaction in the same round on a separate unit. So keep in mind, you can just use the engineering bay to just give tough 1, at which point one of their successful hits is going to become a miss. You don't have to worry about it. It's all good. You effectively pass your armor roll for sure, right? It's kind of what tough is designed to do. It's not going to help you in certain situations, right? So, if they're rushing in and I can't think of too many situations, but let's say that they do get critical 1 for whatever reason on whatever's going on, they're going to bypass that. So don't even spend it, because they're going to send it straight instead of going into the armor pool. It's instead just going to go straight to the damage pool. So, just keep that in mind. Close combat's going to suck in this situation. Okay. But in general, what you really, really want to do is you want to make sure that you're properly set up so that as best you can mitigate the damage going in. Now, if you have a medic squad available in the close combat phase to prevent a bunch of those wounds with their with their med pack, that is also great. But again, just know that this is not as ideal as the marauders, because in the marauder case, we aren't suffering damage at all, right? This one's going to be a little bit trickier, but there are ways to pad it. There are ways to maintain the volume of marines so that you can do your job. Okay. And then the next movement phase, you want to disengage away from the enemy, okay, as best you can. Again, Terran armed forces is kind of a way to make sure that this happens, but you might just be able to disengage away if the enemy is down to lower supply than you, and you're able to then just pull back on your own without having to tap the card. That's always nice. And the big thing to remember is you want to pass early. If you have a little tiny movement that maybe isn't going to make a dramatic difference on VPs, or it's not going to make a dramatic difference in terms of damage, right? You got a small squad of like 3 Marines because they got mauled up a bit that you're going to potentially maneuver somewhere else. Maybe consider not maneuvering them. Just pass. Just pass. And the reason is we want to shoot first, okay? We want to be more effective at taking down the enemy. Now, let's say situation number 3 comes up where you just have lone Marines. You don't have any supporting medics. You don't have any marauders. So our mitigation is down the tubes. A couple things you can do. First of all, once again, we're still going to be maneuvering to within 11 inches of the enemy. That's kind of what we want. Stim pack is a little more risky this time, because the chance that you suffer 1 wound and thus it cascades and you're going to suffer 2 more wounds, so you're at least losing 1 guy, is up there. But the math is still pretty good, because that precision 3, both in shooting, especially if you think you can shoot first, but also in close combat is going to make you at least a little more reliable and make it so that you're at least keeping the enemy honest, right? In terms of what's going on. So I would at least take a look at that and see if that's possible. Step 2, shoot first, right? If you have a unit that you think is going to be charged, activate them first in the shoot phase and try as best you can to get priority, in getting initiative to go first in the shoot phase, okay? The third thing you want to do is, again, remember you have your engineering bay for helping to prevent impact hits. You you can use it there, obviously dependent, because that's probably the only mitigation you're going to have. You might want to, like, it is probably better to use it here instead of using it in the close combat phase, just because if they do wounds enough to you, they might remove potential attacks you get in the close combat phase. It all depends. The big thing here is that you are going to suffer wounds, okay? There's not much else you can do about that. I'm sorry. Precision 3 is going to help you out a little bit in close combat, but that's kind of how it's going to work out. Then you're going to have step 4. Use pinpoint in the shooting phase, in the assault phase, to be able to winnow down the enemy. This is only present on things currently like the Goliath and Raynor. Might be present on other units in the future. We'll have to see. But at least for now, going to be a pretty effective means of just helping to reduce some of those attacks coming into you. So the combat phase is going to suck, but it may not suck as much if you have pinpoint around you. And you've got a pretty reasonable range. It's not a great range, but it is a reasonable range on those pinpoint shots. Relatively close, but it could work out pretty well. And then step 5 in the next move phase, you're going to disengage from the enemy. Terran Armed Forces is necessary, but if you are magically still higher on supply than the enemy is, then great, you can just pull away. But this is where we would plan on using TAF, and why Raynor's Raiders isn't quite as good at this particular scenario, is helping its lone Marines. Okay, and then finally, step 6, very important, in the move phase, pass early, right? We can't say this too often. Pass early because we want step 2 to work. We want to shoot first, okay? We don't want them getting evade saves. So don't let them, okay? Shoot first. And then finally, there is a way to stutter step away from ranged units, okay? Now, this is most effective against things like roaches, I imagine reapers in the future, things that have a relatively shorter range. And most importantly, a shorter range than your Marines. Okay, so the first step is that, again, you want to wait for the enemy unit to activate and maneuver to range if at all possible, because we want to know where their range is, what their maximum is, and how far away they are. If they're going to end within 4 inches of you, there's a very good chance you're not going to be able to pull this off. But you might be able to, and here's the reason why. You then want to set back and you want to assess, can I get an optical flare from one of my medics in range of these guys? So that way we remove the ability to use long range, and we reduce their range by 4 inches. Because if so, then after we know, okay, can we get our 11-inch range or so on the enemy with our squad without being within range of their maximum? If the answer is yes, then use flare. And then step 3, maneuver beyond enemy range and stim pack, right, as needed. That's going to give you buff speed 2. You're going to get buff, you can use go if you need to, depending on what else it is you're using, because I'll be honest, this is a lot of CP in order to try to gank one unit. So you might find it might be a difference between using go or using optical flare. You may not have the chance to use both. And then finally, step 4, force the target to move closer in the assault phase, which means they won't be shooting at you, which is nice. Or if they have to use long range because you didn't flare them, then that's fine. Okay, I don't know too many units that are going to be in that situation. But if it does end up happening in that situation, then at least it's -1 to hit, which is not bad. And then you're shooting at them, right? In this one, it's a little less necessarily to be the first one shooting, because you might find that you don't even have to shoot first. You could just be the one that just gets a shot and they don't get one at all. They have to move instead. Whatever the situation is, you want to make sure that you are shooting and ideally not taking a lot of return shooting back at you. Okay, and that's what stutter stepping does to effectively mitigate these units. Again, it's a relatively small cadre, but if you go up against a roach rush, this could come up quite a bit. Again, depending on what future units end up looking like, there are some relatively short range units. You can also technically, I guess, use it against adepts. Adepts don't have particularly long range. They're really good at mobility, so escaping them is relatively difficult to do because they move really fast, and they are faster than your Marines, so there's that. But in general, you can do it. And that's the video. That's my recommendation. In terms of stutter stepping, a lot of it is thinking through maneuvering, ideally after you know where your opponent is, setting yourself up so that you're a good distance away, making it so that charges are less effective or shooting is less effective against you, and making sure you always get your shots. That's the most important thing. And ideally getting in your shots before they've gotten into close combat with you so that they aren't getting an evade save. But what do you think? Do you think that it's First of all, do you think it's way more work, ironically? Yes, it technically requires less APM, but it does require more thinking and more tactical planning and more assets, especially supply cards, tactical cards running around so you can tap enough CP in order to do what it is you want to do. Do you think that this is just obvious and this is the reason why you dominate on the table with Terran and the reason why you really love it when you see armies that are loaded up with zealots and zerglings? Let us know down in the comments below, and I will see you next time.